President Trump with tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods. Those kicked in at midnight. China came right back. Tariffs on U.S. goods, including soybeans, pork, electric vehicles, and on and on. Then China with the quote out of its Ministry of Commerce saying that the U.S. has started, quote, the biggest trade war in history. That comes as Morgan Stanley reports U.S. tariffs imposed so far would affect the equivalent of just 0.6% of global trade and account for 0.1% of global GDP. Historian Doug Wead joins us right now. So obviously, Doug, percentage terms, this wouldn't necessarily be the biggest anything in history, but, overall dollars, I'm sure, is what they're talking about. But give us some perspective on the size of trade wars, if you can.
Yeah, well, America was born in a trade war. You remember the Boston Tea Party?
That's right.
That's what drove us to revolution was trade. And Thomas Jefferson took on the Barbary pirates. The trade war became hot because he wanted to keep those sea lanes open. That's where the Marines song, the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Right? We sent the Marines over there. And even during the Civil War, Connell, it became a huge issue. The great fear was that Great Britain would recognize the Confederacy because the big textile factories in Great Britain depended on cheap cotton that was picked by African-American slaves in the South. It was a very controversial time. So we've had trade wars. Smoot-Hawley brought us right into the Depression.
Of course, that's the best modern day example, or the one that's given the most, and quite frankly might be the last one we really had. And the thought after that for many economists, I don't know about historians, but for many economists was, let's not do that again. It didn't work out so well.
Yeah, the couple of things to keep in mind, though, Connell. Number one, in my opinion, there is no such thing as free trade. I mean, you look at Nafta, for example, that's 1,700 pages. That's bigger than the Bible. That's Nafta. And most of the simplest free trade agreements are 97 pages. You don't need 97 pages to say the word free. And you had Donald Trump go to G7, and we're now hearing actually offer 0%. You could put that in one line, and they walked away from it. And the second thing to keep in mind is that they cheat. They always have. I worked in the White House where we had American companies coming to us wanting to be subsidized by the American government because their counterparts in other countries were being subsidized.
And we do help some of our own industries. We help peanuts, certainly. Peanut farmers would tell you about that. It's a huge tariff coming in. And even in the auto industry, I mean, on heavy trucks, the tariff coming in is 25%. Everybody talks about the 2.5% on cars, but we help that industry as well. Here's an historical question for you, because we've brought it up a lot when we talk about trade wars. So you hear a lot of people say, nobody wins these things. The president has said they're easy to win, which is true. If you can name a trade war in history that someone's actually won.
Well, of course, he's making the point that we've been losing this trade war where here's $505 billion they're getting. How can we lose this?
Right. No, but the question is does it make it worse, is my point. It's like if we start the tariffs, we go down this road, is there ever an historical example where someone said, hey, let's do this, and it's actually worked out?
Well, I think that Trump doesn't have a choice. He's got to do something. I mean, if America continues what it's doing right now, we know it won't work out. We'll be a poor nation. We can't sustain this. And people say, well, they're communists, so they can endure a trade war. Their people can suffer. They'll let them starve to death if they have to win. But I think Trump's doing the right thing. He's taking on something that Bush, Clinton, two presidents, Bush and Clinton, fast-tracked it, a Republican and a Democrat. It's shameful what the United States has given away to China, and somebody's got to take it on. This guy's pretty gutsy for doing it, in my opinion.
All right, Doug Wead, as always, we appreciate your perspective on these issues. Good to see you.